forum a call to action defending the social safety net. My name is Jim Perlstein. I'm the chair of the retiree chapter of the Professional Staff Congress, and I'm a member of the Social Safety Net Working Group, which is the body that produced tonight's event and produced the pamphlet that was distributed to you this evening when you signed in. I'd like to introduce our president at this point, Barbara Bowen, to bring you greetings.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you, and thank you so much for being here. You can see me, it feels a little dark up here on the stage, but you see me. Anyway, I'm really delighted to be here, and especially to welcome you and commend the working group that put this event together. We have a lot of established committees in the Professional Staff Congress, and as many of you know, we're the union that represents the faculty and staff at CUNY. And we have lots of committees that get together, but one group got together on their own and decided they needed a working group. And that title was interesting to me because it's gained resonance. All the groups working at Occupy Wall Street call themselves working groups. But we were a little ahead of them in the PSC, and it was our retirees who led the way. They formed the working group that put today together. And the timing of tonight's event, I think, is even better, perhaps, than first anticipated when the group put this together. We have at least two things converging. One is the super committee in Washington, which is going to report in December and is charged with finding $1.5 trillion in cuts, has their eye very firmly on the very social safety net that we're talking about tonight. So if you ever needed a context of action for a conference, we have it. We have about a month to influence that committee, and there's a real chance to do that and then influence the reception of their report. So we are not sitting and discussing this in a long-term format only, but also very much in the short term. There is an urgency to tonight's meeting. And there's a second kind of urgency that has been built, I think, for all of us by Occupy Wall Street, focusing, brilliantly, I think, focusing on the economic as the cause. Not only the political, but really naming an economic cause for the radical inequality that has just become unbearable. The social safety net that we're going to be looking at tonight was put in place to make inequality more bearable, and that's one way of looking at it, to make capitalism more bearable, and it's the result of a political movement. One question I think a lot of us are asking is whether this moment of economic recession will generate a political movement of the kind that led to the creation of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Those programs, as a lot of us know, didn't just start because somebody started legislation. They started because of movements. What movement might come out of this moment, I think, is one of the questions we have in front of us tonight. And will it be a movement that includes defending the sort of platform that makes it bearable for people who have been in the 99% to survive in this savage economy? Will it be a movement that provides support for them? So before I turn you over to the panelists, I just want to tell you about one night at our union, one afternoon at our union, where I went into our union hall, because I heard there were various groups meeting. And the big union hall, hard to get a big space in New York City, and we weren't even sure that that was the best use of our members' money to keep a big space. But through the years, we've decided that it was a union hall like this one. And I went up to our union hall, and the divider was across the room, so there were two groups meeting. And on the first side that I went to, there was a working group from Occupy Wall Street, sitting on the floor, talking, creating their own sort of mini university, figuring out their plans, figuring out what to do next, barely even noticed me when I walked in, so alive with the possibility of making some change, and their responsibility of having opened the possibility for new discussion. And they were in there hard at work. And then I walked to the other side of the Union Hall, and there was an equally hard at work group, the working group for the Social Safety Net Conference. All retirees, all organizing themselves, coming together, using the union as their space, as a space to make a difference. So if we we ever wondered what a union could do, I think that's one of the things that union can do. Provide that space for people to work and work in new ways. And let's continue that work tonight. Make this a working conference that makes a difference in not only preserving and stopping the shredding of the social safety net, but maybe imagining something new. So thank you very much. I look forward to the conference.
I was born in 1935, and I grew up with the social safety net. It never dawned on me that I would wake up one morning and look around and say, you know, this is not something I can count on or anybody else can count on. And I think that we can't take it for granted any longer, and that's why we created this social safety net working group, and why we're trying to educate and agitate for the preservation and expansion of the safety net. I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'd like to ask them to come up on the stage and take seats at the table. Our keynote speaker is Dean Baker, who is co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and is the author of The End of Loser Liberalism, Making Markets Progressive. And he's a weekly columnist for The Guardian in the UK and the Huffington Post and True. He's going to be followed by Kim Phillips-Fine, historian at NYU and author of Invisible Hands, The Making of the Conservative Movement from the New Deal to Reagan. Then will come James Parrott, who's the chief economist of the Fiscal Policy Institute, a progressive think tank here in New York, to which many of us have had recourse, and an expert on the political economy of the city and state. At that point, we'll take a break. We'll entertain questions and comments from the audience, and then I'll introduce the devil incarnate, Francis Fox Piven, who will lead us in a discussion of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what we can do.
Thanks. I realize now you all have low expectations since we know that this is not the action part of the program. I want to appreciate Barbara's comments. I just wanted to add one thing. It was actually a little worse than what she had said, because the super committee is not reporting December 1st. It's kind of a classic Washington thing. I don't know if people follow it that closely. They're actually reporting November 23rd. So as you all are preparing for your Thanksgiving dinner, make sure you make a point of noting what, I'm serious, I'm dead serious, and that was not an accident. They know the calendar well. This is classic Washington, because we have two things to hope for with the super committee. The best thing is that they produce nothing. If they do produce something, it will be a turkey, you know, and unfortunately, you know, that they're hoping will be focused on the one we're eating rather than the one they produce. But we're going to have to keep our eyes on it, because they're going to vote on it 10 days later. And this is classic Washington. So just, you know, keep your eye on the calendar. That's the way you do things in Washington. Okay, getting on to Social Security, the part two, the benefits. First off, you know, some of you might have heard Rick Perry was out today yelling about Social Security as a Ponzi scheme, and, you know, it's not going to be there, this and that. So I'd like to take the worst case scenario. So this is from the Social Security Trustees report, and he goes, suppose we never did anything. Suppose we, you know, we just put the program in autopilot, we never did anything. What does it look like? And the point here is, these are inflation-adjusted dollars, so this is saying what could average benefit buy? And what you see is that it goes up. It's currently around 15,000 a year, 16,000 a year, and it rises to a bit over 20 by 2035, and then it would fall off. 2040, it's back around 16,000 a year. Well, that's a story that the trust fund at that point would be depleted, and we can't pay full benefits. We can pay about 80% of the scheduled benefit. Now, I don't want to see that. You know, I hope I'm still alive in 2038. I don't want to see my benefit cut, you know, but, you know, we don't want to see that, but the point is that's kind of the worst case scenario. That's what they're jumping up and down yelling about, the sky's falling, the sky's falling. That even in, you know, worst case scenario, we never do anything, a little hard to imagine, we still are paying higher benefits adjusted for inflation in 2038, 2048, 2058 than people are getting today. So this idea that there's not going to be anything there for me, I don't know how many times I've debated 20-somethings and they go, oh, you guys are getting rich, there's nothing there for me. No, look here, kid, look at the math, look at the arithmetic. And this is straight from the trustees report. No one's got any qualitatively different numbers. In fact, if I took the Congressional Budget Office numbers, they'd look a little better. You pay about 81% of benefits, and they rise a little more rapidly. So there literally is not a story you can tell that, you know, there's going to be nothing there for you. Let me just add one other point on this, that one of the reasons why you face a shortfall is there's been so much of an upward redistribution of income over the last 3 decades. So when they last made major changes to the program, you know, Alan Greenspan, of course, chaired the commission, they set the cap for payroll taxes at a level that covered 90% of wage income. Now, there's been so much of an upward redistribution of income over this period that instead of 10% of wage income escaping taxation, it's now about 18%. So if we had always had 90% of wage income, that's not even a lot of people want to lift the cap. I think it's a reasonable thing to do. There's some issues there, lift it all together. But if you just had 90% of wage income covered, as Alan Greenspan thought was a good idea back in 1983, you'd eliminate roughly half of that long-term shortfall. In fact, a little more.
So the job of a historian in this kind of situation is often to remind us that what we're living through now is not new. And so it certainly is the case here with the struggle over Social Security. The battle over the social safety net and the existence of the social safety net goes back decades, really to the days when it was first created. Most history textbooks have relatively little to say about the struggle over the creation of Social Security in the Great Depression. We think of FDR as one of the best-loved presidents and the basic institutions of the New Deal as ones that commanded a near universal support, undertaken as they were at a moment of national crisis, in some ways to save capitalism from itself. But in reality, although these programs were remarkably popular as they remain, from the moment of its inception, conservative business groups in particular, among others, attacked the New Deal and the efforts to create an American welfare state during the 1930s, and also attacked the expansion of labor union rights, which they saw as very closely bound together. There were a whole range of different kinds of efforts to fight the New Deal and to fight Social Security. But certainly one part of what business groups did was engage in a kind of general political agitation and the attempt to jumpstart what they hoped would roll into a kind of populist campaign against the New Deal. In the heart of the Depression, in the DuPont brothers, the chief executives of the DuPont Chemical Company were sort of the motive forces behind founding the American Liberty League, an organization that grew out of business meetings but never presented itself overtly as a business group or as an explicitly anti-Roosevelt organization. It was supposed to be, or it was described as, an organization that would unite millions of people from all walks of life, workers and housewives and business people, in order to defend, and it's a quote from one of the pamphlets, the principles upon which our government was formulated. And it was sort of had a sort of populist rhetoric behind it. But in fact, the Liberty League was deeply opposed to the New Deal. There's no secret, wrote Irénée DuPont, one of the founders, to the president of Eastman Kodak, there's no secret that one of the experiments is the endeavor to redistribute wealth. In fact, that is what the New Deal really means. So he wrote this to the president of Eastman Kodak when he was trying to persuade him to join the group. And in speeches and pamphlets, League members denounced what they call the ravenous madness of the New Deal, arguing that, quote, the dragon teeth of class warfare are being sown with a vengeance. Mitt Romney would recognize that language. That the New Deal, saying the New Deal was leading to a totalitarian centralization of power, that it was hostile to businessmen who were seen as, quote, unscrupulous money changers, a reference to Roosevelt's first inaugural address, and arguing that the New Deal was creating a bureaucracy that was, quote, spreading its tentacles over the business and private life of the citizens of the country. One lawyer associated with the League tried to mount a legal challenge to Social Security, saying that it was a kind of illegal taking, that it was taking the property of some employers and employees without due process of law to redistribute it to others. As Sterling Morton, the chief executive of Morton Salt, who was active in the League in the 1936 Republican campaign, remembered later in life, he wrote, we attacked the Social Security plan, saying that it was a gigantic fraud, that it was not insurance, that any insurance company which offered like benefits for like payments would be closed overnight by any state insurance commission, and that it was merely a method of painless taxation of the working man to get money for current extravagance in exchange for utopian promises. So it's a kind of attack on Social Security that, again, sounds very similar to that advanced by Rick Perry or others. The idea that Social Security is somehow at its heart a kind of Ponzi scheme. And I think it also raises the question, why do these programs meet with such opposition? Why have they been so troubling for so long to these types of groups? And I think on one level, there is an economic reason. They represent the tax burden. On another level, they give workers perhaps a certain measure of independence from their employers, and the larger the social safety net is, the more people have that independence. But I also think that the rhetoric becomes so charged with language about freedom and social values for a reason, which is that Social Security and Medicare and the broader public sector can actually embody a different set of social values from those which are sort of the dominant ones of capitalism, because they suggest that freedom and a kind of decent freedom and security come from social solidarity rather than from competition and individual striving alone. They suggest in a way that true individual freedom, a real ability to make a decision about what you do with your life and how you live, and a measure of security that is involved in that, doesn't involve the exertion of yourself in a desperate struggle to beat out and dominate others in the marketplace, but that instead it grows out, real freedom grows out of our embrace of society and our creation of institutions that offer mutual support. So I think there's a language of freedom and values because it is really a question of, at a deep level, it is really a question of political and social values.
I want to introduce James Parrott of Fiscal Policy. James.
I think there is something that's worse than an attack on the safety net. And that's an attack on the very idea that people have the right to a job. We have today in this country a situation that we have never had, as far as I know, at least since the 1930s, where mass unemployment is tolerated as the official policy in Washington. It may not be the president's view, but Congress has basically accepted the fact that we have high unemployment and we're not going to do anything about it. Because there are many forces in Washington who believe that they will gain politically in 2012 if the economy stays in the dumps where it is right now. And Dean's last slide sort of went through the consequences of sustained high unemployment. I'd like to add a little bit of outrage to that because that really should be an intolerable situation. 25, 30 million people at a national level out of work or underemployed. The unemployment rate looks like it's come down only because people have left the labor market. In New York City, if you add back in the people who've left the labor market because they're so discouraged, the unemployment rate is still 10%. We're well over 2 years after, quote, the official end of the recession. And we still have 10% unemployment, 10. So we have a Democratic governor who has a platform that basically says that state spending is out of control in New York, that our taxes, state and local taxes, are too high, and pensions are too costly. And that becomes the prevailing narrative, well, progressive side of the spectrum in New York about what our fiscal situation is. And he rode to victory on that and delivered a budget that was true to all of those principles. And he's committed in his second year to continuing that agenda by chipping away more at public sector pensions. So spending was out of control, pointing to Medicaid, the assumption being that this has grown by leaps and bounds in New York over the years. What the governor never acknowledged was that in 2009, in 1 year, 1 million New Yorkers lost employer-provided health insurance. So not surprisingly, that would put a tremendous increase in the demand for Medicaid. And the governor acted like, you know, this is a program, the spending of which is out of control, and we have to rein in. Nary a word about people losing their employer-provided health insurance. Taxes are too high, and you know, he was able to get away with that, even though we had a situation where, relative to other, you know, the discussion about state taxes is always in an environment of it's us against the other 49 states. And it's dog eat dog. We're all out there fighting for jobs and the benefits of investment. And if we raise our taxes too high, we're going to effectively price ourselves out of the market, and our economy is going to go down the drain. We're going to tax ourselves into high unemployment and dysfunction. Whatever our taxes were in New York, and have been, we had the second fastest growth in GDP among all states in 2010, the second highest growth in personal income. There was no documented flight of high-income people out of New York, even though you know, this is the third year of a temporary increase in the personal income tax rates in New York State. So even with that, we had an economy, it's clearly, you know, a very poorly performing economy, but better than almost every other state.
There's a mic on your left, and there's a mic on your right, and first come, first serve.
Why do we keep playing defense? It's a loser's game. We are accepting the assumption that this weak safety net is the best we can defend, instead of talking, as the Canadian brothers and sisters are doing, about increasing Social Security and other benefits. We in New York have terrible workers' comp, terrible unemployment insurance, and in the US, we have among the lowest Social Security. The young people are very attracted, unfortunately, to this madman from Texas idea. They were attracted to privatization under Bush because they have no faith in the system. I hear the wrap-up signal.
We should get better Social Security, better safety net, but just one of the things to correct that. Young people do not support privatization. The only context in which they support privatization is when they're convinced that the existing program won't be there. So they support Social Security as much as older people. It's just they're doing their best to convince them it won't be there.
I think it is important to try not to be on the defensive all the time. I think it's in a way the political moment that we're in, where there's been a lot very accustomed to a framework of austerity, and it's hard to shake that off and start being willing to make larger demands, but that it is very important to begin that process, begin to expand aspirations and imagination instead of restricting that.
Center for Work Education. I'm also a member of Occupy Wall Street through September 17th of this year. The one thing I'd like to ask Mr. Baker, is in his discourse on defending us with the loser liberalism thesis. Would you talk about how that is now in play? How that there are progressives out there who are actually taking it to the next level, whether it be in the street with the average everyday protester down at the Cotty Park, Liberty Square, or with the PSC here at the Union. The one thing I would also like to say, could you also expound a little bit on the devaluation of the dollar and how that would affect people's savings when they do devaluate the dollar in order to fix the economy?
Basically, the story, you know, the way to think, or at least the way I would think about it, is that what we're doing by having a high dollar, well, two things. On the one hand, we have a large sector of our economy that's largely protected from foreign competition, and it tends to be higher paid workers and also capital. And on the other hand, what you have is less well-paid workers, manufacturing workers in particular, who are subjected to international competition. And by virtue of getting low-cost goods from abroad, what that means is that they get low wages. Now, part of the story when you get the dollar down is, yes, the imported goods will cost more. There's no doubt about it. That will have a limited effect in reducing, for people who have savings, that will have some impact on their savings, depending on where they have it, what sort of assets they're holding. but they are likely to see a little bit of hit. But we're talking 1–2%. We're not talking 20–30%. But it also will raise the wages of working people. So to my mind, that's a trade-off well worth doing. The other part of the story, people are concerned about debt. Right now, basically, we're getting a lot of goods from abroad that we're not paying for. I don't think we can do that forever unless, someone wants to give us stuff, indefinitely and not expect us to pay for it. So we are going to have to do that in any case at some point. I think it makes more sense to do it earlier and try and plan for it rather than to have it happen possibly very suddenly and create some serious disruption. So I don't really see a downside to that story. The question is, do we want the dollar to fall now, or would we rather have it fall at some unpredictable time at some point in the future?
I want to thank the Professional Staff Congress and especially their Social Safety Net Working Group, because I think it is pioneering of them to raise this issue and raise it in a loud voice at a time when everybody else is talking correctly about jobs, 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 because to put the issues side by side shows their interconnectedness. To be sure, the safety net is important because it is what binds us together as a nation. We care for each other. We protect the sick, the poor, the orphan, and so forth. But it is also true that the predatory attacks by a corporate-led politics on workers, on wages, on unions, on working conditions has been paralleled by a predatory attack on the safety net. And I don't just mean Social Security, although I do mean Social Security, because the two go hand in hand. When workers are a little more secure, they can fight back. And unemployment insurance makes them more secure. Food stamps makes them more secure. The millions of women who were forced into the low-wage labor market after so-called welfare reform was stripped of those protections. And that made them a vulnerable labor force. So, congratulations to the PSC. It's a first step. Now we're going to try to organize second, third, fourth, fifth steps that put the safety net issues squarely together with the jobs issues. I want to make one other comment, and that other comment has to do with not just the safety net, but poverty, extreme poverty. We're ready to talk about Social Security, we're ready to talk about Medicare, we're ready even to talk about food stamps sometimes. But the super committee dealing with the deficit is now talking about cutbacks in a program called WIC, the Women's, Infants, and Children's Nutritional Program. We have already eviscerated what we had of a welfare program for the poor. People only talked about poverty for a blip a day when the census report came out saying that we had 50 million poor people in the United States, and that's by the official measure, which is meaner, stingier than any other rich country. So that when we talk about our action plan, let's make it an action plan that links arms with the poorest people in our communities, links arms tightly, because they are one of us, and because their hardships, their degradations, are also visited on the poor working people who keep their shoulders to the wheel, in part because they're afraid of becoming so desperately poor. With that said, because we don't have a hell of a lot of time, I was going to throw out a few suggestions for what we could do to defend the safety net. The PSC committee has already said we should be talking about it, we should be writing about it, and I agree with that. Anyway, I want to throw out a few suggestions. One of my suggestions, in addition to raising the issue of the safety net and raising the issue especially of the way poor people are faring as a result of cutbacks in the safety net combined with joblessness. One of the things that we can do, hallelujah, we can go down to Zuccotti Park and we can have signs. They won't let you put the signs on sticks. The cardboard signs about poverty, about this mayor's rotten welfare policy, about evictions, about the menace to Social Security. We can raise our voices as part of the movement. You know, for too long we've been talking about the middle class. I always thought it was the working class, but we've been talk about the middle class, and that makes us, for a while I didn't think it mattered, but then I thought, well, maybe it's making us oblivious to the plight of the millions of Americans who aren't middle anything. So we should make a presence in Zuccotti Park, a presence to defend the safety net, to defend poor people, to defend ourselves as well. And we should be there all the time. You don't have to sleep overnight. I know it's hard. First step. Second step, I think, but maybe you have a better idea, I think we should reach out to the poverty groups in New York City that have held on, tried to fight the battles in Albany, groups like Fury, Make the Road, Citizens' Voices. We should be reaching out to them. Now, when the unions marched to Liberty Plaza, they didn't march just because they were invited. They marched because they wanted to go. And we should link up with these groups, bring them to Liberty Plaza, but even more important, fight the day-by-day actions that they fight every day in every way, some having to do with changes in policy, and some having to do with the abuse that people suffer in welfare offices. Used to be that advocates would go into welfare offices. They're not there anymore. We should go back into the welfare offices.